Hi everyone, it's Mike Pohatu here, and today I just want to run through some of the formatting options and styling options that were added to TsGui version 0.9.6.0 and above. Um, Now the whole goal was really just to give a bit more flexibility over what the GUI looked like. I felt that the layout of having just a single um, width for the label and for the control within a column was a bit restrictive, and I wanted to do GUI something a bit more like this, where you had you could mix the GUI layout up a little bit to make better use of space and not have controls that would just massively oversize or undersize. Um, so what has happened is there's a few changes to the XML schema, but your legacy configs will work just fine. And I'll show you some of the newer options in the XML and what things look like moving forward. So just a quick overview from a layout point of view. The main thing you'll notice straight off the bat is that whereas before we had a page and a column, we now have rows as well. And this is what's let us, break this up a little bit. So what we've actually got within this GUI, oopsie, not that one, is we have one row here, and then we have actually a whole nother row here. So the top row has got two columns in it, and the bottom row's just got one. And then we have another row, and then another row down here that has three columns inside it. So then you've got one column here, one column here, etc. You kind of get an idea of what's going on. So from a layout point of view, just keep that in mind. If you create a page and you don't actually create this row element, i.e. if you've got a legacy config, what TsGui will do is actually put that part in for you. So it'll just create a single row and then put whatever columns you've got inside of that and style it that way. So that's the brief overview of the layout. Now if you're interested, so this was the screenshot that I posted when I put up the new version. If you want to actually get a copy of this config so you can see how it was done and what it looks like, if you go to the 20road.com website and go to the TsGui overview page, down the bottom where it's got a link to the source code, that will take you to the GitHub page. Now in GitHub, if you go to test configs, and these are the configs I use to test for bugs and that kind of thing. But so the one you're looking for is this one here, config.10.xml, which is here. And I've actually already downloaded a copy of that, or run up a copy of that here. What I'm going to do is just turn on the show grid lines option so you can kind of see what's going on with it. And let's run this config file up. config.10.xml. And let's just get rid of this validation rule. So you can see here where the columns have been broken up and where things are kind of sitting within the GUI. So some of the newer options, obviously, we can now set widths of the control and the label independently, even within a column, whereas before they were all the same all the way down, which was a little bit frustrating at times. We can set font weights, i.e. set it to bold. We can set it to italic. We can put some colors on the text. We can actually reverse this, so rather than having the label on the left and the control on the right, you can now have the control on the left and the label on the right, if that's what you want to do. You can also mess around with some of the paddings and the margins and that kind of thing um, within there if you really want to. So that's basically the end state, or what we've ended up with. So let's have a quick look at what it actually looks like inside the XML file. So obvious first change, you now have a row element, and you can have, again, any number of columns within a row. Another thing you'll notice straight up front is that whereas before we had the label width and the control width, I'd now consider that to be legacy options, and we're now using left cell width and right cell width. And the reason for that particular change is because you can now reverse having the label on the right rather than the left. So therefore calling it the label width is no longer necessarily accurate. And we've also moved it inside this formatting block. And you'll probably see soon why that was done that particular way. So that's the core basics. So from the very basic config.xml, that's kind of what you'll see. Inside the main config.xml, there's a few more bits and pieces scattered in, but it's otherwise basically the same. You've got the same GUI options. Where you'll notice differences is that there's this great big block here. If you go to the config_formatting.xml, which is in the config_examples folder, underneath this GUI option here is this great big block here. And those are all the formatting options. Now, you don't need all of these options, and generally speaking, what you'll find in the config.10.xml is that there's actually only one or two of these things set. But just for documentation's sake, these are all the things you can potentially do. So let's have a bit of a look. Actually, I'm going to run the actual config up. I'll just get rid of that validation rule again. Now, let's start from the top. Label on the right. Basically, this is the thing that you'll use to reverse these two things around. So putting the label onto the right-hand side, obviously. If you set that option to true, those two bits will get reversed. If you leave it as false, or if you don't have that element at all, they will stick to the default. Now the left cell width we've already basically covered, so that's always the left hand side even if you reverse them, and the right cell width is always the right hand side. Now you've got two blocks, and these are basically identical in terms of the options available. This set here applies to the label, whichever side that happens to be on, and this one applies to the control, either the checkbox or the text box or whatever it happens to be, whichever side that happens to be on. And you can see here, if we come down from top to bottom, you've got the width of the label, you've got the height of the label. Now generally speaking, these are just set to auto, and they'll figure themselves out depending on the things further up the tree. And I'll get back to inheritance in a minute, because you can actually set these at different places within the tree and have them flow down, which may save you quite a bit in terms of redundant code, XML code. So you've got the padding. Now, for those of you who haven't done much work with with GUIs before, whether that be web or standard Windows programming, the padding is the space between the edge of the control, in this case a text box up here, and the content inside it. So between the edge of that control and that W1. And if I recall correctly, I think that's the left padding, top, right, bottom. Um, and if you just set that to a single number, i.e. number 2, like that, it will just set all 4 sides to 2, and that's 2 pixels. Now the margin, same sort of numbering again, and same, all the way around, left, top, right, bottom. The margin is the distance between the edge of the control and its adjacent, or anything adjacent, whether that's the edge of a grid or another control. So this top margin here, if you set a margin of, say, a top margin of 10, there'll be a gap of 10 between the top of this checkbox and the edge of that grid line just there. So that's what the margin is. The vertical alignment, where it lives in the vertical space, usually set to the bottom there. Horizontal alignment, this varies a little bit depending on the control. If it's a text box like this, the horizontal alignment will be set to stretch, and that means it will fill up the space of this right cell, or the left cell if you're in the left cell, whatever cell it happens to be in, but it will fill up whatever that space is. If you set this to a horizontal alignment of, say, left, center, or right, and you can see the different options that are available here, what will happen is that text box will now shrink down to whatever text it happens to be inside it, and will kind of resize as you start typing potentially. So if you're going to do that, setting the left and right alignment, it's usually a good idea to change the width from auto to a specific width as well. But you can have a play around with that. The text alignment is the text inside the control. So if you change that from left to center, that W1 will start living in the center of the text box. And now we come down to the font options. We've got the weight, which is our bold, extra bold light. The font size in pixels, just like you would have in Microsoft Word or any other text editor. 11's the default. Style, this is what will let you set italics. And the color. I'll try and get a full list of colors that are available in one of the next versions. Probably, if I can get to it, it'll be 09.6.1. Now, one thing that's missing from here, and sometimes you want to set this, sometimes you don't, depending on what you want to achieve, is the width and the height. Now, the main things to be aware of with the width and the height is that you've got to take into account your padding and your margin. So if you set the left cell width to 110, and then for the width of the label you set a specific width, and then of the width, so this width and this height here of the main block is for the entire GUI option, so all the way around the outside. Now when you do that, you've got to take into account, like if you set so the left cell width, which is our label, if we then set this to 110 down here, what will happen potentially, depending on how bad things are, and it's usually more noticeable on controls, to be honest, especially free text, is that you may find that it actually disappears off over this edge, and you don't get this little edge here. So basically the sizing's not right, and the reason for that is that you've got a left cell of 110. Inside that you've got a control that says I have a margin of 2 pixels. So effectively your label is now too big for the amount of space inside the cell, and the width inside the cell is 110 minus 2 on the left and minus 2 on the right. So you're looking at 106, not 110. So just be aware of that when you're working these things out. Generally speaking, you end up just kind of playing around with the stuff anyway, until you get it to look how you want it to look. So those are all of the options. The control is exactly the same as the label, so you can tweak them individually if you want to. What tends to happen, I mean, obviously this actually looks like quite a lot of XML, especially if you had to do this on every single GUI option, but you don't need to. So what you actually end up doing is, let's take the entire thing and come into our GUI option and our blank config, paste the whole thing in. Now you basically just remove everything you don't care about. So we're not going to change the label to be on the right or the left, so let's get rid of that. The width and the height are generally best just left alone to work themselves out, to be auto-sized. If you set the left cell width and the right cell width, the main cell width will work itself out anyway, so you don't usually need to worry about it. So we'll leave those ones there for now. Again, these are going to be set to auto by default, so I don't really care about those. The padding and the margin, I just want to keep the defaults, so I don't care about those. The vertical alignment and horizontal alignment, again, don't care about those. So you can kind of see where this is going. There's not going to be much left. Text alignment, don't really care. All I really want to do is I want to change the style to italic, and I want to make the color to be red for our label. Don't care about the size, don't care about the weight. Gone. And we're going to do the same thing for the control. And on this one, actually, what I'll do is I'll set a bold. Don't care about the size. Don't really care about the style. And I'll set that to green. And we're done. So now if I just run up TsGui, let's see what that looks like. See, we've got our italics and our bold font. Now, you can see here, even if you had to set this on every GUI option, that'd be a real pain in the butt. So what you can do is inherit this. So you can take this formatting block and set it at pretty much any layer of the tree. So if we just want to set it on one GUI option, we just leave it where it is. But if we want to apply it to every GUI option on this row, we would remove it from there. We'd come up to the row and paste it in. Let's clean that up a little bit. Save. And now every GUI option that you apply to that row will pick up that formatting. So we've got our computer name GUI option. Let's grab something else here. Let's grab this drop-down list out of the examples, just for fun. And let's whack that in there. Now if we run this up, both of the GUI options inside our row have picked up that styling as well. So that way at least you can save yourself a bit of time and energy, and just send things down the tree via inheritance. Now if you only want to set a few things up the top, so you might just want to set the colors and the italics, and then you may want to set further things further down the tree, that's completely fine. What will happen is if you put a formatting block further down, and let's put one here for the drop-down list, and again, Notepad++ has messed my formatting up. So if you do this further down the tree, that's already set further up the top, so we don't care. And we decide that we want to leave the label formatting the way it is, but we want to set the color of the text and the control to be blue. So now we still keep, we've got our bold, we've got our red italics on the label, and just the these two options that we've set here. We don't actually even need the bold bit, we can delete that if we wanted to. That'll override anything that's been inherited on the way down. So yeah, it's a fairly intuitive inheritance model there. So that's pretty much it. If you've got any queries, issues, feedback, please get in touch via the 20road.com website. I'm also fairly active on the SSEM subreddit as well. If you want to flick me a message on there, feel free. Thanks very much.